Alrighty guys, so Ridgeway here, working our way back through some recordings that I need to redo, and going to be taking some time here to explain combat in World War One. Okay, and to walk you through this lesson generally. So we're going to look at how kind of combat develops on the Western Front in World War One, and then why it develops that way in particular. Okay, we'll look at why that happened. And then we're also going to kind of be examining some of the big kind of broad happenings and kind of flow of the war. So we'll talk about a virtual museum that you'll be able to do later. We'll get into that. What I need you to do first here is a choose your own journey story, where you are going to be using something through the Canadian War Museum to kind of get the best picture that I can probably get you of what fighting in World War One is like. So there's a link to it right here on this button. When you're done, you're going to complete this battle report and you're going to submit it on Brightspace. And the instructions are all right there, like it says exactly what to do. There's also a model on the second slide of it, so you can see an example of kind of what I'm looking for you to complete with it. Okay? Let's go on then to kind of why does combat look the way that it did in that choose your own adventure game. Okay? So again, you want to make sure that you play that before you do this mini lesson, or things won't really make sense. Okay? So there's this old quote that we have about war and combat, and it's this idea that armies are always ready to fight the last war. And that is going to be definitely true here. To an extent, maybe in for any other war that we've ever analyzed possible, besides maybe World War II, that might be a good one that might apply there. And then we're also going to be looking at a really how technology is going to really change the dynamic of how this war is going to be so different compared to those in the past. Okay? I call this phrase in this quote, this slide, that World War I is really a war that is defined by new technology but with old mentalities. Okay? So, and this is often will sound very strange to folks when they learn about World War One, or they go in depth. They open up a textbook and they look at why does it look like so much trench warfare, and it just devolved and it looks just awful and horrendous. Like, this doesn't seem fun, quote unquote, at all. And it has to do with kind of the way that armies were supposed to fight before the war, before World War One broke out. So I want you to picture in your mind the classic Civil War maybe, or Revolutionary War battle. And when people picture those battles, a lot of what they see in their mind are armies in these really neat straight lines and rows. And the reason why armies did that, and it was a couple of different reasons. One is that warfare, especially before World War One, is considered to be a much more, we're going to say, gentlemanly kind of endeavor, where it is very, very structured, it's very regimented, it's more polite, to use that word. Civilized maybe is again maybe another word that I might kind of might toss around with it, but it also comes from a practical point of view, where the reason why they have armies that are in such tight rows and lines is because especially in the Revolution and Civil War, where a good shot is getting a shot off every 30 seconds to a minute. It's because the technology did not allow for rapid shooting, we'll say. Okay. And so the military tactics that are really taught before World War One reflect that, where you line up in straight lines. There's the idea is that when you move with your troops, you're trying to break the enemy's lines with these these mass human wave charges. And really kind of they will follow this kind of rule, at least a lot of World War One commanders will, that you want to have a 2-to-1 advantage when you're attacking, because as an attacker it's always harder, right? The thing that's going to change, though, or that's really going to be different about World War I, is simply the technology that the different armies are going to have on hand. Okay, so mortars aren't necessarily anything new, but machine guns are. And just the proliferation of machine guns, as well as then later in the war, things like poison gas, that can just mow down these, mass human wave charges, and they can kill literally thousands of men in a minute. I mean, The British Army, like when it attacks, in some of these Western Front battles, they'll lose 17 to 30,000 people within an hour. It's just an incredible, it's just an incredible amount of suffering that a lot of these tactics are going to try. And so what we get then is, like, if you take this old mentalities, combine it with new technology, well, then you get this result of where these old tactics are still used to try to break lines, but this new tech just results in these atrocious numbers of suffering and casualties. And so then the only way to not experience getting mowed down by machine guns constantly is to start digging. Okay, and that's where we get trench warfare from in World War One. And then you're kind of left with how do you break out of trench warfare? You could think about a tactic or a technology. There's lots of different things that you can kind of consider and ponder. The Germans will come up with a solution in World War II, prior to World War II, that actually will get them out, will kind of change this dynamic. But maybe you have something that you might think of on your own that could be a possible solution. So for them at the time, what do World War I planners do? If tech was the problem, maybe tech then is the solution. And that's what they kind of tend to go to. So, like, for example, that's why chemical warfare, like gas, chlorine gas, mustard gas, all these different just horrible ways of killing people are invented. Also, tanks are invented. And so, and a little bit of a caveat to mention with tanks here is that tanks, like, originally, for the purpose of their invention, it's actually not so that you could necessarily, like, have a gun mounted on top of them that could fire. That's not the purpose. The idea is that you have something that men can walk behind that won't get them shot to pieces by machine guns. The only problem is tanks in World War One. Not only are they pretty rare, but they break down constantly. They're just incredibly unreliable. And so there's, just not that's not really going to be a workable solution either. Maybe it's just mortars, and that is what a lot of World War One devolves into, which are just these, before lines will try to break each other. So like before one of the more very famous conflicts and battles that happens in World War One is something called the Battle of the Somme, and before the Somme even happens, the British and the other sides, they will bombard the I think for like 2 weeks straight with mortar fire. And so again, like, the only way you keep yourself safe from mortar fire is just to dig even more trenches, right? There's other technology that is used. Such as like aircraft. They aren't really used to break trenches at this time, and aircraft at first are really thought of as more of like a scouting, kind of technology. Eventually, in World War One, we do get to the point where there are the first aerial dogfights between planes shooting each other, but that takes a long time to get to. Like the first, casualty, air-to-air casualty in World War One that happens is when one pilot throws a brick at another pilot in their plane and kills them. But it's not like all of a sudden you have like people like being like, oh, I could put a machine gun on an airplane. Like that takes time to like come up and think of. And then even then they can't actually figure out a solution to do that correctly. There's all sorts of zany ideas they come up with, like, well, do you put the machine guns like further out on the wing? That doesn't really work because then a lot of these planes they're not super sturdy, we'll say. And it's a lot easier if you can have the machine gun right in front of you, aiming at what you're, wanting to shoot at, right? Only problem is in World War One, there's no jet engines. Again, it's all propellers. So like, then you shoot off your own propeller. So like, what's the solution to that? So they try coming up with like a bulletproof propeller, where essentially like you have bullets bouncing off of the your own propeller occasionally, because like the bullets, like as they pass through the propeller, some will hit it. That obviously is not a good idea because bullets can bounce back and kill your own people, or they just aren't actually hitting anything. So then eventually they come up with a little bit of mathematics, and they have it so that the bullets shoot through the propeller on a proper timing kind of system. But again, like, this isn't all overnight, and this isn't solved within a year. Like, again, World War One is only about 4 years long. So again, technology takes time to invent, right? And really kind of what you're then left with, so for example, like if the classic World War One strategy is, then you're gonna just absolutely mortar the other side to pieces, and then hopefully you again again how a typical World War One battle might go is that like you would mortar the other side just for a very long time, and then you would order your human wave charge to start across what's called no man's land, which you saw in the Choose Your Own Adventure game. And hopefully, by the time that you have started your charge and you have run all the way across no man's land to the other people's trenches, you're able then to take over that trench. The only problem is for sides who are, like if you're attacking, that distance you have to cross no man's land is a lot longer than the other side, who simply has to climb up out of their trench, get on their machine guns, and then mow you all down, right? So again, like tech is not really a solution here. And so the tactics that we'll see in World War II are really going to be incredibly helpful in breaking this dynamic of trench warfare. Okay, but that's for another day. So how you're going to end this lesson is something called the World War I Museum. And so I really just kind of want you to get a general kind of walkthrough of some of the different elements of World War I that we won't have time to talk about more specifically in class. And so there's 5 galleries here that you can explore in this museum. You only need to explore 3, and then you'll fill out 3 of these areas on this worksheet right here. It's very easy to navigate around if you go to the next slide. Here's the different galleries. You literally just click on them to go to them. So here's gallery 1. And then you just click on the different elements of the gallery. So for example, if you go over and click over here, then you can learn about what the race to the sea is, okay? Or over here, you can kind of get a sense of like what the front looks like. And then you can go back to the lobby once you've looked at those. Again, you click on them to go to them. You can click back to the lobby and then go off to another gallery, okay? So pretty straightforward there. And then I will see you guys in the next lesson.